Black single dad found a beaten female CEO in the rain. You're safe now. Before we get into this incredible story, let us know what city you're watching from in the comments below. The rain fell in sheets, a cold gray curtain that seemed determined to wash away the last vestiges of hope from the small town of Havenwood. It hammered against the roof of the Beacon, a diner whose name had become a cruel irony. The neon sign, a proud looping script of blue and red, had a terminal stutter. It flickered B on, Beacon, then just B before giving up entirely for a few seconds, plunging the storefront into the oppressive gloom of the storm. Inside, the silence was as thick as the scent of stale coffee and fried onions. Elias watched the rain trace jagged paths down the large plate glass window. Each drop looked like a tear, and he felt a weary kinship with the weeping sky. He was the sole proprietor, cook, and janitor of this failing enterprise, a legacy from his parents that had become more of a millstone than a milestone. In the back booth, curled under his own worn coat, his 7-year-old daughter Maya slept the untroubled sleep of the innocent. Her small chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm that was the only source of peace in Elias's world. Her presence was both his reason for fighting and the constant, aching reminder of how badly he was losing. The stack of bills on the corner of the counter was a monument to his failure. Red letters screamed, "Final notice." The rent, the electricity, the supplier for the paltry few ingredients he could still afford. They were all coming due. He'd run out of extensions, out of friendly credit, out of time. He ran a hand over his tired face, the rough texture of his calloused skin a testament to years of hard work that had yielded so little. He was a good man. He worked hard. He loved his daughter with a ferocity that was the core of his being. But in the cold arithmetic of the world, none of that seemed to matter. He was alone, a black man in a town that was polite on the surface but held its judgments close. They saw his struggle, and in their eyes, he saw a confirmation of their low expectations, a self-fulfilling prophecy he fought against every single day. He was just about to turn off the sputtering coffee machine, to surrender to the night and the inevitable tomorrow, when the small bell over the door chimed. The sound was so unexpected, it made him jump. He hadn't had a customer in hours. He turned from the counter, ready to say they were closed, but the words died in his throat. A woman stumbled through the doorway, more a collection of shadows and water than a person. She was drenched, her dark hair plastered to her face. Her clothes, what he could see of them, were of a fine, dark material, but they were torn and smeared with mud. She took 2 hesitant steps into the diner, her body swaying as if she were about to collapse. Then, under the weak, flickering light of the diner, she looked up. One side of her face was a canvas of deep purple and angry red, a blossoming bruise that marred the otherwise sharp, intelligent lines of her features. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and exhaustion, found his. Then they rolled back, and she crumpled to the linoleum floor in a heap. For a heartbeat, Elias was frozen. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at him. This was trouble. This was police and questions and complications he couldn't afford. His gaze flickered to Maya, still sleeping soundly, a fragile anchor in his chaotic life. Bringing this storm into their small, sinking boat was madness. But then he looked back at the woman on the floor, so utterly broken and vulnerable, and the part of him that was a father, a son, a decent human being, took over. He rounded the counter in 3 long strides, his own problems momentarily forgotten. He knelt beside her, the cold of the wet floor seeping through his jeans. "Ma'am? Ma'am, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice gentle. He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her shoulder. She flinched, a low moan escaping her lips. Her skin was like ice. He couldn't just leave her there. Carefully, he slipped one arm under her shoulders and the other under her knees. She was lighter than he expected, all sharp angles and shivering muscle. He lifted her easily and carried her to the booth opposite Maya's, the worn vinyl sighing under her weight. He grabbed the thick wool blanket he kept for Maya on cold nights and draped it over her shivering form. He hurried back to the kitchen, his mind working quickly. He poured the last of the day's soup into a bowl, a hearty vegetable broth he had been saving for his and Maya's dinner, and heated it on the stove. While it warmed, he brewed a fresh, strong pot of coffee, the aroma a small act of defiance against the despair that had filled the room moments before. When he returned, her eyes were open. They were a startlingly clear shade of gray, and they watched his every move with a sharp, assessing intelligence that seemed at odds with her battered state. He placed the steaming bowl of soup and the mug of coffee on the table in front of her. "Here," he said softly. "This will help with the cold." She stared at the offering, then back at him, her expression unreadable. Suspicion warred with a desperate need in her gaze. "There's no charge," he added quickly, sensing her hesitation. You looked like you needed some help." He saw the tension in her shoulders ease, just a fraction. He backed away to give her space, busying himself by wiping down the already clean counter. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask who she was or where she came from. The story was written on her face, and it wasn't his place to demand an explanation. He just offered a quiet space out of the storm. "You're safe now," he murmured, as much to himself as to her. He watched as she picked up the spoon with a trembling hand and took a tentative sip of the soup. In the flickering light of his dying diner, a small, fragile connection was forged, an act of simple kindness offered with no expectation of reward. The woman, who he would later know as Cassandra, ate the soup with a slow, deliberate focus, as if each spoonful were a monumental effort. She cradled the warm coffee mug in both hands, letting the steam rise and thaw the chill from her face. She didn't speak, and Elias didn't press her. The only sounds were the drumming of the rain and the quiet hum of the old refrigerator. Cassandra's mind, usually a fortress of strategy and calculation, was a ruin. The assault had been sudden, brutal, and personal, a betrayal from within her own circle. They had left her for dead on a deserted back road, taking her car, her phone, her identity. They had underestimated her will to survive. She had walked for what felt like miles, the icy rain a constant punishment, until she saw the light. Not just a light, but a beacon. A flickering, failing, beautiful beacon. She had stumbled towards it, her last reserves of strength giving out the moment she crossed its threshold. Now, sitting in the warmth, she observed the man who had taken her in. She saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the worn collar of his shirt, the faded photographs of a smiling woman and a baby tacked to the corkboard behind the counter. She saw the stack of angry red envelopes. She saw the profound gentleness with which his gaze kept drifting to the sleeping child in the other booth. He was a man drowning, yet he had thrown her a lifeline without a second thought. Her world was one of contracts, of transactions, of debts owed and collected. This simple, unasked-for kindness was a foreign currency, and it struck her with more force than the fists had. "The beacon," she said. her voice a raw whisper. It was the first thing she'd spoken. Elias turned, surprised. Sorry? The name of your diner, she clarified, gesturing vaguely with her mug. A good name. It was my father's idea, Elias replied, a sad smile touching his lips. He said a good diner should be a light for hungry and tired folks. Seems the light is about to go out. He didn't know why he said it, admitting his failure to this complete stranger. Perhaps it was the lateness of the hour, or the shared vulnerability of the storm. Before she could respond, a violent banging on the glass door made them both flinch. A large, florid man with a face like a clenched fist was peering in, his expression one of pure irritation. He rattled the locked door again. Elias, I know you're in there. Don't you dare pretend you can't see me, the man bellowed, his voice muffled but still menacing. Elias's shoulders slumped. Mr. Croft, he sighed. He walked to the door and unlocked it. Silas Croft barreled in, bringing a gust of wind and rain with him. He was Elias's landlord, a man who owned half the town and squeezed every penny from it with a miser's glee. He didn't seem to notice or care about the woman in the booth. His eyes were fixed on Elias. Don't you check your mail, boy? Croft sneered, his tone dripping with condescension. He tossed a damp, official-looking envelope onto the counter. It landed with a wet slap. That's a final eviction notice. I've given you more time than you deserve. I want you and all this junk out of here by noon tomorrow. I've got a buyer for this land, and I'm not letting you stand in the way of progress. Mr. Croft, please, Elias began, his voice tight with desperation. I just need a little more time. Business will pick up. Business! Croft laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. There is no business. There's just you failing, like everyone knew you would. His eyes finally landed on Cassandra in the booth, taking in her disheveled state. A lecherous smirk spread across his face. Well, well, at least I see where your money's been going. Can't afford the rent, but you can afford company. The insult hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Elias's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The urge to wipe the smirk off Croft's face was a hot, surging tide. But he thought of Maya. He couldn't afford to get arrested. He couldn't afford anything. You need to leave, Elias said, his voice dangerously low. I'll leave when I'm good and ready, Croft shot back. Noon tomorrow, Elias, or I'll have the sheriff here to throw you out on the street, and I will enjoy it. He gave Cassandra another dismissive, contemptuous look, then turned and stomped back out into the storm. The silence he left behind was heavier than before. Elias stood with his back to the room, his whole body trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation. He had nothing, less than nothing. He had failed his daughter, failed his parents' memory. The flickering sign outside finally gave up the ghost and died completely, plunging them into near darkness, illuminated only by the single dim bulb over the kitchen pass-through. The beacon was out. From the booth, Cassandra watched him, her gray eyes narrowed. She had seen men like Croft her entire life, bullies who preyed on the vulnerable, mistaking kindness for weakness. But she had also seen the fire in Elias's eyes, the restraint that cost him more than the violence would have. She slowly pushed the blanket aside. Her gaze fell on the corkboard, on the faded photo of the smiling woman. The nurse's uniform was unmistakable. City General Hospital. It was an old photo, the colors washed out, but the woman's eyes were kind, and she wore a small, simple silver locket. Your wife? Cassandra asked softly. Elias turned, his face a mask of grief. Her name was Sarah. She passed away 5 years ago, just after Maya was born. Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. She looked closer at the photo, at the locket. It was a long shot, a memory from a lifetime ago, but it was there. "My father," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "He was a patient at City General a long time ago. A bad accident. He was alone, scared. He told me a nurse stayed with him long after her shift ended." She held his hand, told him stories to keep the fear at bay. He said she wore a silver locket. Elias stared at her, then at the photo of his wife. Sarah's locket. It had been her most treasured possession. He had buried it with her. She always did things like that," he stammered, his mind reeling. "My father never forgot her kindness," Cassandra said, her voice gaining strength. "He built his entire company on one principle. Every debt must be paid, especially debts of kindness." She looked Elias straight in the eye, and for the first time, he saw not a victim, but a queen. "He taught me that a kindness repaid is an investment. A kindness forgotten is a sin." A new, unyielding resolve settled in her features. The storm inside her was calming, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. The man who had taken her in was the widower of the angel who had comforted her father. The universe didn't deal in coincidences. It dealt in ledgers, and a very old, very significant debt was about to be settled. The reality of his situation crashed back down on Elias. This strange, powerful story was a ghost from the past. Croft was the monster of the present. Noon tomorrow. He had less than 12 hours before he and Maya were homeless. Cassandra, despite her newfound resolve, was still weak. Her phone was gone, her resources cut off. "I need to get to a specific address," she said, her voice firm. "No phones, no credit cards, just a taxi." She named a street in a desolate industrial park on the far side of the city, a place no one would go unless they had a specific, serious reason. Elias looked at her, then at the small cash tin under the counter. Inside was $43.16, his entire net worth, the gas money to get out of town, the money for Maya's breakfast. Every rational thought told him to keep it, to save his daughter. But his wife's memory, the story this woman told, and the simple, undeniable rightness of helping someone in need warred against his fear. Sarah would have helped. She would have given her last dollar without a second thought. He let out a long, shuddering breath, the sound of a man letting go of his last hope. He walked to the phone, called the town's only 24-hour taxi service, and gave the address. Then he went to the tin, took out two $20 bills, and laid them on the table in front of Cassandra. "This should cover it," he said, his voice hollow. "It's all I have." She looked at the money, then at his face, and she understood the magnitude of the sacrifice. This wasn't just cash. It was his future, his escape, his daughter's next meal. He was giving it all to her, a stranger, based on a ghost story and a glimmer of shared humanity. "I will not forget this, Elias," she said, her voice ringing with the quiet authority of a monarch making a vow. He just nodded, too empty to speak. He helped her to the door as the taxi's headlights cut through the rain. He watched the car pull away, its red taillights disappearing into the darkness, taking his last $40 with it. He went back inside, turned off the last light, and sat down in the oppressive dark of his failed diner. He put his head in his hands, and for the first time in a long time, he wept. Morning arrived not with a sunrise, but with a slow, reluctant graying of the sky. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean and dripping. For Elias, it felt like the aftermath of a flood that had swept away everything he owned. He had packed 2 small bags, one for him, one for Maya. Clothes, a few of Maya's favorite books, and the framed photo of Sarah. That was all that was left of their life here. Maya sat at the counter, eating a bowl of dry cereal, blessedly unaware of the impending disaster. She kicked her legs happily against the stool. "Is the lady coming back, Daddy?" she asked. "I don't know, Sweet Pea," Elias said, his voice thick. "I don't think so." At 10:30 he saw the car, not Croft's ostentatious sedan, but a sleek black SUV, the kind that whispered of government officials or corporate power. It was followed by another, and another. A silent, imposing convoy of 3 identical vehicles pulled up in front of the beacon. They parked with unnerving precision. Elias's heart pounded in his chest. Was this Croft's idea of an intimidation tactic? Men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerged from the vehicles. They moved with the quiet efficiency of a wolf pack. The lead man, broad-shouldered and with a face that looked like it was carved from granite, opened the rear door of the center vehicle. Cassandra stepped out. She was transformed. The bruised, terrified woman from the night before was gone. In her place stood a figure of immense power and control. She wore a simple, elegant dark gray suit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe but stylish knot. The bruising on her face was still there, but it was skillfully concealed with makeup, and instead of making her look weak, it now looked like a war wound, a testament to a battle she had survived. She met Elias's stunned gaze, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips. She walked towards the diner door, her lieutenants fanning out behind her in a protective formation. Elias stood, frozen, behind the counter, Maya hiding behind his legs. Cassandra entered, and the diner suddenly felt very small. "Elias," she said, her voice calm and clear, "I told you I wouldn't forget." Just then, Silas Croft's car screeched to a halt behind the SUVs. He got out, followed by the town sheriff, a man who had always been more loyal to Croft's money than to his own badge. "All right, Elias, time's up," Croft bellowed, a triumphant smirk on his face. "Sheriff, get him out of here!" Before the sheriff could take a step, one of Cassandra's men, a man with the lean look of a lawyer, stepped forward holding a tablet. "Mr. Croft," the lawyer said in a tone that was utterly devoid of emotion. As of 6:15 this morning, Croft Holdings LLC was acquired in a hostile takeover by a subsidiary of Thorn Industries, which means, as of 6:15 this morning, you are no longer the owner of this property. In fact, you are no longer the owner of much of anything. Croft's face went from florid to pale white. "What? That's impossible." "I assure you it is very possible," the lawyer continued. "Furthermore, a full forensic audit of your books has been initiated. I believe the state attorney will be very interested in your creative accounting practices." The sheriff, seeing the sudden and dramatic shift in power, backed away from Croft as if the man were radioactive. Cassandra turned her attention back to Elias. "My father built Thorn Industries on a simple code. Repay every kindness 100-fold. Your wife, Sarah, showed my father a kindness when he had nothing. That created a debt. Last night you showed me a kindness when I had nothing. You honored that debt without even knowing it existed. And now, I will honor it." She gestured to the door. A second wave of vehicles was arriving. Vans and construction trucks. A woman in a sharp blazer stepped forward with a portfolio. "Mr. Elias," she said, "we have paid off the diner's mortgage and all outstanding business debts. The deed has been transferred to your name. We have also established a fully funded, irrevocable trust for Maya's education, and a business capital account for you with a starting balance of $5 million. The crews outside are here to begin a complete renovation of the beacon, per your approval, of course. Elias couldn't speak. He sank onto a stool, his legs giving out. He looked from Cassandra to the stunned face of Croft, to the army of polite, efficient people now flooding his diner. He looked at Maya, who was peering out at Cassandra with wide, curious eyes. The reward cascade was overwhelming. Within a week, the beacon was transformed. The flickering sign was replaced by a brilliant, warm neon light that shone steadily through the night. The cracked vinyl booths were replaced with plush, comfortable seating. The ancient kitchen was gutted and refitted with state-of-the-art equipment. The community watched in stunned silence. The story spread like wildfire. The story of the quiet, struggling diner owner and the mysterious, powerful woman he had saved. Elias was no longer the town's pitiable failure. He was its quiet hero. Croft, facing federal charges, was a disgraced memory. The grand reopening was an event. The entire town showed up, eager to see the new place and the man at the center of the miracle. The beacon was full of light and laughter and the smells of delicious food. Elias, wearing a crisp new chef's coat, moved through the kitchen with a renewed purpose, his heart full to bursting. In the corner booth, their booth, sat Cassandra and her inner circle. They weren't customers, they were family. They came every week, a silent, protective presence that ensured no one would ever bother Elias again. They spoke little of business, instead asking Maya about her school day and listening to Elias's stories about his wife. They were his found family, forged in a storm and bound by a debt of kindness. Maya, no longer a quiet, timid child, laughed as she brought them a plate of cookies, her future as bright and steady as the new sign outside. A year later, Elias stood outside the diner, watching the evening settle over Havenwood. The beacon was more than a diner now. It was the heart of the town. He hosted free Thanksgiving dinners, sponsored the local Little League team, and never turned away anyone who was hungry. He was not just surviving, he was thriving, and he was lifting the entire community up with him. He looked up at the sign, a constant, unwavering light in the gathering dusk. He finally understood its name. It wasn't a description of the building. It was a description of the principle by which his parents, his wife, and he himself had tried to live. A beacon doesn't choose who it guides. It simply shines. He thought of the $40 he had given away, the single most costly and wisest investment he had ever made. It serves as a reminder that the truest wealth isn't what you have, but what you are willing to give away. For it is in those selfless moments that we find our greatest returns. If this story touched your heart, make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss an inspirational video.